People can often find the 50mm focal length on full frame cameras or an equivalent on a different sensor size a little bit difficult to compose with. On one hand, it's not really wide enough to fit in a lot of the scene, like a 35mm lens is. On the other hand, it's not really tight enough to isolate our subject completely. As a result, it can just feel a little bit like it's neither here nor there, maybe getting the worst of both worlds and not the best of both. But when a 50mm lens is used effectively, it can create a clean, minimalist look. So the most common mistake I see people making is they're trying to fit too much into the scene. They end up with cramped, confusing and cluttered compositions, and those compositions tend to look a little bit flat and boring. So what's the solution? Well, the way to work with a 50mm lens effectively is to understand that we're not going to be able to fit loads of the background into the picture. What we should do is just pick 1, 2, or maybe 3 elements of the background that suggest where our subject is, that suggests where we are. The 50 derives its minimalist and cleaner look from not overloading the background with lots of context. This gives us nice storytelling. It makes us feel like our subject is in the location and we're close enough that we feel as a viewer that we're with them as well. So the way to do this when you're on location is that you need to turn. You need to move in an arc and turn and balance the elements that are in your composition. You might just pick a couple of things that you want to emphasize in your background, but you need to make sure that they balance well. And it's that rotation, because what we don't want to do is fall into the trap of walking backwards to get everything in, and then we end up with those boring photos again. We just want to balance bits of maybe 2 things in the background, and then by turning and keeping our subject distance the same, so we're not moving further away from our subject, but we're just adjusting the balance of what's in the frame by moving around our subject in an arc, we can then start to balance the compositional elements around our subject. So as you can see in this picture of Amber here, but I'm able to use the sides of the roads and the cars, kind of like leading lines leading towards her, and then she's framed by the buildings around her. It gives us some context to the location, but I'm not overemphasizing where we are. We're able to just adjust our composition and framing, so we're not making big changes, we're just making small ones. We're able to get a consistent look like that. And then here we can even go for some creative angles like this. I was careful to make sure the top of the buildings didn't go beyond the top of her head, so she sort of frames within that space. But by not overemphasizing the background, I'm able to let the model experiment a little bit, and I'm able to experiment with some different compositions like this. When it comes to my urban photography and street scenes, typical of the 50mm, there's nothing particularly dominant in the scene. You'll know when you get it right with a 50mm because everything just feels really well balanced together. One of the tricks I like with a 50 is minimal framing. That odd angle that I used with Amber before was using some of the background elements to frame, but I'm doing it here again with Ellie. You can see that I've used some of the scaffolding in the background to create a frame around Ellie, but because it's on a 50mm, it's quite subtle. We're not overly aware of it again. But something else we can do compositionally with a 50, which it's really good at, is half-length portraits. So when we move in closer to our subjects, sometimes we want to do something that's a tighter composition with a 50. The kind of picture that we might do with an 85, sometimes we want to do it with a different perspective that the 50mm gives us. So the 50 is very good at giving this kind of neutral framing. I think 50mm for half-length portraits is a really nice look. But then there are other times where we want to get just that headshot, and you can do it on a 50. It's a little bit harder, but I've got a tip for you. The way to do it on a 50mm is you want to bring yourself a little bit lower. Because 50mm, yes, it's not a wide lens, it's just in the middle. You can start to get a bit of distortion of facial features at 50mm when you get really close to your subject. So what I like to do is come down and make sure that I'm on the eye level of the person that I'm taking a picture of, or maybe just slightly below. That helps to remove any distortion issues that we have from our lens or our sensor being tilted towards the subject. I want to be more like level with their face like this. When I'm shooting close up and I'm doing headshots, it actually works really well, but you just have to remember that tip. Learning tips like these can really transform the way you work with your camera. Learning is always the key to progress. Once we know more, then we can do more. And that brings me on to the sponsor of today's video, which is Skillshare. One of the classes I've been doing recently has been social media content creation in Canva by Maggie Stara. The reason I've been doing it is because for my photography business, I want to be able to send information to people in a way that looks stylish and professional. And this course is really starting to help me do that. Now, if you don't know, Skillshare is the largest online learning platform for creatives with thousands of classes across categories like design, photography, film and productivity, and even freelance business tips. What I really like about Skillshare is that the classes are taught by industry experts and they know what it takes to get from beginner to a professional level. And they take a unique approach to learning because they emphasize learning by doing, and learning by doing always has the best results. So you're not just watching videos, you can create projects and get feedback from the community. And that is such a brilliant way to stay motivated. If you're a visual person like me, then taking a complete class like this is a great way to learn. What I think is the biggest benefit of becoming a member of Skillshare, all of those different things that you've wanted to learn in the past, getting enough knowledge in them that it actually starts making a difference to your life. Like learning a different language, improving your skills in photography, design, computing, anything like that. I mean, imagine how much you could learn even in just 1 month. But luckily, the first 500 people to use the link in my description will get a 1 month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today. So where the 50mm shines is as an editorial lens. So editorial is like storytelling, but usually over a series of images. So we're not just taking one picture, we're taking several. But what can you do? Let's say you've got your 50mm, but there are a few exercises you can do with a 50mm. They're going to help you see and compose in a different way. And the first one is the most important one, and it also doesn't require any other people. And that is to start composing images where you have one subject, but you have a few, like 1, 2, or 3 supporting elements in that. But you can just do this at home. I really don't think that people need to set up shoots or go to different places in order to become better photographers. One of the things I'm really keen on is that people can become better photographers in their own home, in their local park, anywhere that they want to go. So the way you would do this is you would take your subjects and instead of backing up and trying to make real sense of all of the things that are around your subject, I want you to bring in elements of different things into the frame. Find something that you want to be your subject. It can be anything. It can literally just be something in your kitchen. And then look at all of the different compositions that are possible where you include other elements of things that are there, but you only bring them in as suggestions, things that stick into the frame a little bit, just to give context to the subject of your photo. And you really won't go wrong with taking the most mundane objects, the most ordinary things, a park bench, for example, or even a cup of coffee, something like that. So you're trying to make something that looks clean and minimalist, and you're trying to keep it as simple as possible in your mind. I want simple compositions, stuff that isn't complicated. Those are the kinds of things you see in adverts in magazines. Simple compositions, supporting elements. Experiment with getting to different heights. You know how I said that when I do headshots, I come down to the model's eye level to try and flatten things out more? Well, you can do this with other objects as well. So you should really experiment with different heights that you can be at, and then rotating around and moving around that subject and see. Don't just try to get one composition. Try different angles and see that how as you move up and down without having to go so much backwards and forwards, you can emphasize and de-emphasize different things in your picture. Don't try to find an interesting subject. Try to find something boring and make it look interesting. Try to take something that's really ordinary, like a spoon or a pen, and try to shoot it in a way. Feel free to move things around and do whatever you want, but try and make it look interesting. This will really challenge the way that you think about photography, because when you do this with a 50, it pays off in all of the other different focal lengths that you'll shoot, because there's always crossovers. You know, a lot of the techniques that I'm showing you now and teaching you, you can do this with other lenses as well. Of course you can. That absolutely makes sense. But certain focal lengths suit certain looks better than others. The second step, to take this a little bit further, is I want you to create a series of images that go together. So you're creating a sequence, an editorial sequence. This is a series of images that are designed to work together. So we might take this inanimate object, something dull, something boring. So we're going to take pictures at different angles. And then what we might do is include other things that are relevant in the shot so we see it in different ways. So an obvious example of this in photography might be that we have a car and then we see it at a location and then we see it being used. So let's say it's like some sort of 4x4 vehicle. So we might see it going through the mud and then it's parked up somewhere and someone's leaning out of the window talking to someone. Then they're unloading things from the back, this kind of thing. But the subject is the same. It's just the car. We're seeing how it's being used and we're seeing what's going on around it. And other things, the context, the sort of the attributes and things that are around it are changing. So we can do this again at home or outdoors, however you want to do it. Think about the context of the life of an object, if that makes sense to you. But how does that thing get used? What do people do with it? How do people interact? You can do this with people as well. So if you have people or someone that you live with, if they don't mind, try photographing them whilst they do a task, like cook something, and document how they cook that thing. You'll do it in a way where you're documenting that process, showing the things that they're using, but not giving that overall scene. You don't have to do the wide establishing shots so much. This is more about the person holding the pot, tipping something out of it, chucking something into it. It's like smaller, narrower snapshots of what's actually happening. Try it out and see what happens. You might be really surprised because it's actually fun. I think the 50mm is a really fun focal length to shoot with when you use it in this way. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, you might want to check out my video, which is like this, about the 85mm focal length. And you can check that video out here.